I'm Hind Al-Ansari, and I'm excited to welcome you to the second episode of the Forum's podcast. Today, we'll be diving into the evolving foreign policy strategies of the Arab Gulf states, the impact of current regional events, and how the race for the next American president could shape the future of the GCC US relations. Joining us here today is Dr. Abdullah Baabood. He is a member of board of directors and academic from Oman. He is currently holding the chair of the State of Qatar for Islamic Area Studies and a visiting professor at the Faculty of International Research and Education at Waseda University. He taught at different universities and institutions in Europe and the Gulf, and he has previously held the positions of the director of the Gulf Studies Center at the Qatar University and the director of the Gulf Research Center at the University of Cambridge in the UK. Dr. Abdullah's teaching and research interests focuses on international relations, international political economy, especially on globalization and regionalism. His area of focus is on the states of the Gulf Cooperation Council, economic, social, and political development, and their external relations. Dr. Abdullah, thank you so much for joining us here today. So, Dr. Abdullah, in relation to Donald Trump's former presidency, one of the things that he celebrates or considers monumental achievements of his time in office is the Abraham Accords. And a lot of experts as well consider this event where several Arab countries signed a peace agreement with Israel, including Bahrain and the UAE, to be a historic event for the region. And meanwhile, the Biden administration has been pushing for Saudi Arabia to follow suit despite the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza. Now, this continued push for Saudi-Israeli normalization appears paradoxical, arguably far from pragmatic, especially in light of the massacres being committed against the Palestinians and the rise of anti-US sentiments across the region. Now, while it's clear that Saudi remains the US's most important ally in the Gulf, what do you make of Washington's insistence on Saudi recognition of Israel at this particular time? And what gains does Washington hope to acquire in case Saudi proceeds with a peace agreement?
Okay, well, President Trump can celebrate the fact that he forced some Arab countries to normalize with Israel. But as we know, normalization does not come at the cost of having a Palestinian state, and it cannot be pushed down the throat of the Arabs and the Palestinians. And what we are seeing now in Gaza is actually a good test for this normalization. And if Abraham Accord actually worked, we would not have this war in Gaza, and we would not have Abraham Lincoln, the aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean, to protect Israel. What Israel needs to do, and what the United States, of course, cares for the security of Israel, is to ensure that the Palestinians get their state. And this is an international agreement through the United Nations that there should be a two-state solution. Israel does not believe in that, in the two-state solution. It doesn't want also a one-state solution. It wants to have an apartheid state where it controls the Palestinians and keeps them under domination and become a settler colonial power. The Palestinians would not agree to it. Well, whatever Arab country sign a peace process is not going to resolve the issue. It's not about Israel and Arab countries. It's about Israel and the Palestinians. This is what has to be sorted out first and foremost. The Arab countries have always accepted a peace process with Israel. They have accepted the Oslo Accord. They have accepted to recognize Israel. So there is no point in trying to push them to normalize, because that is not going to resolve the issue. And this is where I think President Trump has gone wrong, and I think also President Biden followed suit in that sense, pushing the Arab countries to normalize with Israel, but it hasn't brought peace. So if this crisis in Gaza that we are now witnessing, and the genocide or that Israel has launched against the Palestinians, if this is not a lesson to show that Abraham Accord has failed, what else is going to tell us? President Trump celebrated also the fact that he moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and that is against international law, because Jerusalem is still not negotiated through the peace process, and it's still part of the Palestinian territory according to the two-state solution agreement, or it has to be negotiated between the two parties. He celebrated giving the Golan Heights, a Syrian territory, to Israel. Is that going to bring peace to the region? If the United States, if the US administration wants to have peace, it has to recognize the rights of the people in the region. It's not about whether Israel should exist or not. I think that question has already been answered. The Arab countries have accepted to deal with Israel, have accepted to accept Israel and to work with it. But does Israel want to accept the Palestinians and give up its colonial settlers policy and give up the other Arab lands to Lebanon, to Syria, etc.? Does it really want to have peace with its neighbors? This is where the pressure should be, not on the Arab countries that have already accepted the peace. The pressure should be on Israel. And I think the US administration would be fooled to just keep pushing Saudi Arabia or other Arab countries to do so. And there might be other Arab countries might be forced into getting into the Abraham Accord. But that's not going to be the answer. It's not going to resolve the problem. The problem is with the Palestinians. And the problem is between Palestinians and the Israelis. And this is where the pressure should be targeted to. Obviously, Saudi Arabia has its own strategy, has its own policy. It wants to have certain security guarantees from the United States. It wants to have support for its nuclear program from the United States. And the United States, in lieu of that, is asking for it to recognize Israel and also go through the Abraham Accord, which of course is something that the Saudis have rejected so far. Even if they were forced to do so by one means or the other, it's not going to resolve the problem. I think the leadership in the United States has to recognize that this is a Palestinian issue, and it's about occupation, it's about apartheid state. It has to work on forcing its ally Israel to abide by international law and by international order, and to give the Palestinians their land, and allow them to have their own state and their rights to exist. And then I think normalization would be a process that all Arab countries have already said that they would do so. So I think this is the wrong policy, with all respect, and I don't think it is going to gain any ground. And I think the Saudis have now taken a back seat, given what they see as Israeli genocidal war against the Palestinians. It would be a mistake, I think, for Saudi Arabia to go into any kind of agreement with Israel or any Arab countries when their public opinion at the moment is outraged across the Middle East, across the Arab world, across the world, in fact, of what Israel is doing to the Palestinians.
Dr. Abdullah, I think one can also argue that Israel has sort of or fully sabotaged the deal for prospects for any future peace agreements, not only because of Gaza, but also because of the military siege in the West Bank, where soldiers are destroying civilian infrastructure, they're arresting people en masse, they're prohibiting military aid from coming in. And, regional leaders are certainly watching as Israel takes these actions, and as well as the US entrenches its policies in the region, particularly through its unwavering support for Israel. But they're not the only ones paying attention. When Western media addresses the GCC, it frequently paints a picture of a region composed solely of royal families and state actors, as though the general population is invisible or merely passive beneficiaries of state-provided wealth, in exchange for silence. However, we all know this depiction is far from the truth. The frustration and anger among the people have reached, if not surpassed, boiling points, and the Gulf leaders are acutely aware of this. Now, the US's unconditional support for Israel, including its continuous flow of military aid and its attempt to frame Israel's actions as self-defense, is fueling widespread discontent, and there is a growing disconnect between the state policy and the public sentiment in the region. So I guess my question here is twofold, especially that the U.S. foreign policy in the region is able to create tensions between the masses and the Gulf governments. So despite this, Gulf governments continue to maintain unmoved relations with the U.S. And how are they able to manage to rationalize their steadfast alliances with the U.S.? Are the state media narratives, public condemnations, or appeals to stability and economic benefits enough to shield them from public backlash? Or is there a deeper strategy at play to mitigate the disconnect or the discontent, even coming from the publics, from the Arab Street, from the Gulf Street, to the GCC governments, to be specific?
Thank you, Dr. Hind. I think many people, many Western governments, when they look at the Gulf states, they look at them as monarchies, autocratic regimes, and that they think that they can exercise some pressure on them, and that the public doesn't have a voice like in democratic countries, and in the media, the public media, etc., is controlled by the governments, and therefore governments can do everything. And I think that is a total fallacy that the West think of the region. Yes, we do not have democracy or elected governments, etc., but the voice of the people is heard, and the voice of the people does matter. And these royal families have survived, and they are resilient and built their own resilience because they are part and parcel of this fabric of society that is linked together, and they understand and feel the pulse in the street and the pulse of the people. And there are many ways that the people can get their voices to the rulers, and particularly in this regard, when people see the massacres over TV screens with the mass media and social media, etc., see it on their phones. There is a lot of outrage, a lot of discontent that is happening here against what Israel is doing, but also against who supports Israel. And this is, in a sense, puts the relationship between the Gulf states and the United States at risk. They can see that the fact that these governments in the Gulf are still having good relationship and so on, and not critical of the United States support for Israel and wavering support and conditional support for Israel. They see it as double standard. They see it as something that they cannot accept, and they don't want their own government to do so. I have come across a lot of people who refuse to send their children to the United States or to the West, and many businesses have also stopped dealing with companies in the US, and there is like an official boycott of some certain US and Western companies in the region that is harming the economies and in both sides, in fact. And I think the United States needs to take the region seriously, especially given that the United States is no longer the only power that is playing this hegemonic role in the world. We are seeing competition from China, we are seeing competition from also India, we are seeing competition from Russia. And the Gulf states know how to navigate this, and they are building their relationship, strategic relationship in many ways, with China, which has to a large extent upset the United States, especially when it came to the Chinese involvement in infrastructure projects and high tech firms, etc. The 5G. So, but we've seen that the trade is actually increasing with China and Asia. We've seen that as the center of global economic gravity is moving eastward, so is the Gulf states are moving eastward. Their oil, their exports are moving eastward, and their interest is moving with that export. That is their only income, or the majority of their income comes from their oil and gas exports, and obviously they would follow that. And so the United States has a competitor in the region, and that is China. Obviously, China does not guarantee security. It's not yet in a position to do so. But over time, things are changing. And I think the United States and policymakers in the United States have to take the region seriously, and they have to understand how this region functions and how does it think. It's not about not accepting Israel. It's not about they want to destroy Israel, as some people will think. It's about coexisting. It's about accepting everyone in the region. And this is the principle that the United States has actually used to try and teach us that we have to be living together in one world, in one region, and cooperating and so on. And the Arab countries have shown that they want to cooperate with Israel. They've shown that they want to have good relationship with Israel. They are no longer asking for the destruction of Israel, as some people would think or put it. But they want peace, and peace cannot come through pushing down their throats the Abraham Accord, because that has actually failed. The peace will only come, as I said earlier, through a resolution of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Whatever measures the United States try to do is not going to resolve the issue, and the Palestinians are not going to accept anything less than having their own state. Or maybe both sides can agree in having a one-state solution. But you can't have, Israel can't have its cake and eat it, and push the whole region towards accepting it without having to pay something for what they are doing. And given this multipolar world that is now still not clear where it's going, but there are indications that there are competing global powers, I think the United States is going to lose some of its allies in the region if it's not too careful of how to deal with the region that is already in turmoil, the region that is already not sure what it is, what is going on. So they're trying to play a hedging game, establishing good relationship with adversaries of the United States. In this sense, China, Russia, and other powers. And I think what is going beyond the scene in terms of agreements and economic relationship is going to be instrumental in having a strategic relationship in the future with these powers, which is going to compete with the United States. So I think there is a lot of rethinking that needs to be done.
I think what you said in terms of, pivoting towards China, strengthening relationship with China and the East in general, does resonate with a lot of people in the region. I've written an article about the growing anti-US sentiment in the region. I have spoken to people, and I did include some of their quotes in the article. And I still remember many people actually said, and we can even find this on Twitter or on X, where they say, why are we still maintaining our relationships with the US and Europe when they have sacrificed international humanitarian law? They're not treating us as if we're equal human beings. So why not pivot more to Japan, to China, to Singapore, where they're not committing the same atrocities that the U.S. and the West are committing in the region. So there's definitely a lot of interest in exploring ties with Asia. I mean, even in the realms of education, you probably have heard about what happened to Texas A&M in Qatar with the smear campaign, with the false rumors, accusing it of having a nuclear program, and that led to its closure, breaching the contract, having the campus closed before it's supposed to, in a few years' time, I believe in 2028. So a lot of people are even asking the same questions, like when is it time for us to pivot to greater powers who have more similar values, or at least would humanize us, to say the least. But I think also China is benefiting from these ties because they're allowing them to deepen its influence in the region through infrastructure, as you said, and even through soft power. And most notably, its peace deal between Saudi and Iran in 2023. And recently, they have been quite vocal about Israel's assault on Gaza and its illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories, including in the UN Security Council. Now, Dr. Abdullah, I want to end our lovely discussion. I wish we can keep going. There is definitely a lot to unfold and talk about.